So, diplomatic talks between the US and Iran have completely stalled. They've hit a dead end. And in the aftermath of that collapse, tensions across the Middle East are frankly at a breaking point. We're seeing military posturing quickly take the place of any kind of negotiation. So how on earth did we get here? And where could this all be headed? Well, it kind of all starts with one single, very telling moment.
Right, let's start with this moment, because it really captures the entire standoff perfectly. You've got these high-stakes diplomatic talks happening, and a reporter asks a pretty straightforward question about U.S. demands. But the response isn't some prepared statement, it's just open laughter. I mean, this is basically political theater, a really clear and defiant message being sent to the whole world.
You know, that laugh was a massive signal to Western intelligence. It wasn't just showing disagreement, it was showing a fundamental refusal to even engage with what the U.S. was asking for. And just like that, diplomacy breaks down, forcing everyone back to the drawing board to figure out their next move.
To really get how that moment of laughter was even possible, we have to rewind and look at the negotiations that completely fell apart. See, the talks in Oman were supposed to be the path away from escalation, but instead they just revealed this giant chasm between the two sides that, words alone just couldn't fix.
From Iran's perspective, which has been shaped by decades of foreign intervention, this whole thing isn't actually about a weapon. They claim their real atomic bomb is sovereignty, just having the power to say no to the West. The nuclear program, at least in their version of the story, is just a symbol of that resistance and their independence. And this is where it gets really interesting, because you can see this massive gap between the two stories. On one side, you have Iran saying over and over again, our program is peaceful. But on the other side, you have Western intelligence pointing to actions that they say fly in the face of those very denials. Okay, so with diplomacy basically dead in the water, the whole tone shifts. It gets way more aggressive. The language of negotiation gets swapped out for the language of war, and it's all being played out in public for everyone to see.
And we're not talking about some subtle backroom threat here. This is a gigantic banner put up in a public square in Tehran, showing a map of Israeli cities and promising missile attacks. It's a declaration designed to be seen, to be understood by everybody.
And this number right here, it really puts that threat into perspective. Before all the recent fighting, intelligence sources figured Iran had an arsenal of about 2,000 ballistic missiles. And these aren't small rockets. A lot of them can hit targets all across the Middle East. Even with their recent losses, they're working like crazy to build that capacity right back up.
This is where it gets incredibly complicated. You'd think allies like the US and Israel would be on the same page, but even they can't agree on how to contain this. The US proposed a 500-kilometer limit, but that still leaves parts of Israel vulnerable. So Israel is pushing hard for a 300-kilometer limit, which would put them completely out of harm's way.
So how does America respond? With an equally powerful visual. Key White House envoys get photographed touring the USS Abraham Lincoln, a massive aircraft carrier right there in the region. The message couldn't be clearer. Sure, diplomatic channels might be closing, but the full power of the U.S. military is definitely still on the table.
But here's the thing you have to remember. This isn't just a two-player game between the U.S. and Iran. Not even close. This conflict radiates out across the entire Middle East, mostly through a powerful network of proxy forces that are funded, armed, and basically directed by Tehran.
And this right here gives you a kind of who's who of that shadow war. You've got Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis down in Yemen, and various Shia militias in Iraq and Syria. They all extend Iran's reach and pretty much do its bidding all over the region. Let's start in Gaza, where Hamas is proving to be incredibly resourceful. Intelligence shows them trying to smuggle weapons with drones, paying children to gather unexploded bombs so they can build IEDs, that's improvised explosive devices, and even taking a 15% tax on humanitarian aid trucks. It's a systematic way to rebuild both their money and their arsenal. Meanwhile, at the same time, if you look north to Lebanon, Hezbollah is going through this massive internal shakeup. They've taken some pretty big losses recently, so now they're trying to lower their profile. A really powerful security chief was just kicked out, and you're seeing power shift away from religious figures to more political ones. It's all an attempt to adapt to new pressures. So, you've got failed talks, missile threats, proxy wars, and it all leads to this, a super high-stakes, urgent meeting in Washington. The Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, is flying in, and honestly, the stakes could not be any higher. Now, the official story is that the trip is all about making sure any future deal with Iran is a strong one. Israel is really worried that the U.S. might agree to a narrow deal that only deals with the nuclear stuff while completely ignoring Iran's ballistic missiles and its whole proxy network.
But, as it often goes in this part of the world, there's a growing feeling among military analysts that the public reason for the trip might just be a cover story for a much, much more serious conversation happening behind closed doors.
The speculation, the theory floating around, is that this meeting isn't about preventing a war, it's about planning one. The idea is that both leaders think Iran is just stalling for time, and the real point of this trip is to finalize plans for a joint U.S.-Israeli military strike.
And all of this brings us to the final, dangerous calculation that every country involved has to make. With diplomacy stalled and military plans apparently moving ahead, what are the factors being weighed in this terrifying decision between war and peace?
And you gotta remember, none of this is happening in a vacuum. This is just the latest flare-up in a regional conflict that has already been raging for over 850 days, involving all of these Iranian-backed groups.
So why not just launch a strike? Well, it is incredibly complicated. You've got the fear of oil prices going through the roof, the very real risk that a short war could spiral into a massive regional one, the political chaos of starting a new war during a U.S. election year, and the fact that every single day a strike is delayed, Iran gets better at hiding its weapons.
And just when you think it can't get more complex, here's one last, really fascinating detail. At the exact same time the Israeli Prime Minister is in Washington, senior military officials from Saudi Arabia are also scheduled to be there. Now, it's unconfirmed, but having all those top military planners in the same city at the same time, it really suggests some serious joint coordination is happening.
Which leaves us right here, with the biggest question of all. The path of diplomacy looks like a dead end. The military threats are getting louder, and the strategic planning is speeding up. In a situation this volatile, is conflict now the only way forward?